Ma'am,
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon.
are you hearing me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Okay. Now I'm going to formally start the session. I feel great pleasure to introduce Dr. Veena K.N., the Dean, Dayananda Sagar Business Academy, Bangalore, Karnataka. To all my participants, you are luckiest to have a great and renowned expert for our 7-day national workshop on research methodology started from the 5th of January 2021. This is the third day of the I would like to give certain introduction of our resource person, Veena KNG, just to motivate our students that if they will make preparation, they will give the devotion and dedication, they can do anything in their futures. And the important thing is that the research in which courses they are registered, how they improve the quality of their research. Because undoubtedly, the number of researches, including all universities in India and abroad, but as for the quality is concerned, there is a question mark. So this is some efforts with the help of the workshop so that we can motivate our student and provide the certain fruitful lessons to our students so that they can improve their research and the research methodology, and they can able to write the good research papers and articles also. Again, I am welcoming Madam Veena KNG. Madam Veena KN is a PhD in Business Administration from Mysore University, postgraduate in Statistics from Mysore University, and he has got the first rank and a postgraduate in Total Quality Management from Sikkim Manipal University. He has more than 90 years of academic experience of teaching various classes of UG and PG programs. She has headed management department and statistics department at reputed institute. She has been a part of the steering committee and core member for writing self-study report for national and international accreditation. She has been a resource person for faculty development programs, management development programs, workshop, and consultant for organization in the area of statistics and management. She is one of the sought after faculty for workshop on SPSS for research scholars, faculty, executives, and students. Invited as visiting professor at the National Institute of Social Development, Ministry of Social Justice, 2013, to deliver a course on research methods. She is one of the very few certified entrepreneurship educators from New Stanford IIM, Bangalore, and has undergone various courses related to entrepreneurship and have mentored students and entrepreneurs. She has conducted many workshops on topics related to the entrepreneurship for faculty and students of various institutes. She had spared market research for small and medium entrepreneurs in the capacity of chief enumerator and statistician. She has presented more than 20 papers at national and published papers in reputed journals in addition to chairing sessions in conferences, including some of reputed institutions like IM Kozhikode. During her tenure, more than 100 postgraduate management students during their dissertation internship, and also assisted research scholars though data analysis preparation during their doctor thesis. It's our great opportunity to have a Professor Veena Kian as our resource person for today. I hope our students will be benefited with the delivery of Professor Veena Kian, and where there is required, she can chat with their questions also. Again, I am welcoming Professor Veena Kian. Please, Madam, go on for your lectures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction of mine. I hope I'm audible.
Okay, yes.
Yes. Thank you to your institution for inviting me to be a part of this workshop. I hope.
We are also obliged to have a resource person like you.
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
also thankful to the person have given you the references. Thanks, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And I hope that the workshop is going to add value to all the research aspirants who would be doing their PhD or any other research activity as an academic work, also as a professional work. So I hope that the session will add value to them. And congratulations to the department and the institute for organizing this type of a workshop for the benefit of all the aspiring researchers. So the topic given to me for the workshop, which is on the research methodology, the topic which I'll be discussing with all of you is about the types of variables that we deal with, different scales of measurement that are required and involved in research, then data editing, tools need and what and how of data editing, and finally some e-tools which are available, both open source and paid versions, which are available for collection of data. So here, since the title given for the discussion today is in this sequence, I have kept the presentation also in the same sequence. So having said that, I would like to first, before I jump into what are the types of variables, I would just like to touch upon the idea of research. I think as Professor Kripa Shankar Jaiswal ji said, the workshop is already into the third day, and therefore you must have already learned how research can be carried out in a foundational way. You would have already got introduced to all of that. So let us first look at what is research. In my view, research is an art of doing a scientific investigation. So if you look at the statement that is given here, research is an art, but it is not like an art without a structure. It has got a very defined structure, and therefore it is a science. And whenever we talk about science, the very first thought that comes into our mind is science deals with systematic approach. So when we talk about research, we are talking about a systematic approach of knowing something. So science, research deals with knowing something about a phenomena, about an event, or about an incident, and the knowledge is gained through a systematic approach. So research, when we use the word research, we are trying to know something through a systematic approach. But while doing this process of knowing, we need to ensure that we putting all our creative instincts together to understand what is happening, how is it happening, why is it happening, and what might be the result of it. And all these questions will be answered as a process of research. So quickly, when we talk about research, broadly we can classify research into two main streams. One is the research in physical science, wherein we try to understand the very hardcore scientific facts related to all the scientific events that happen. In the sense, if you're looking at a physics experiment, a very simple example, if I take an object to a height and leave my hand, then the object drops. This is for sure. And the reason for this is gravitational pull of the earth. Irrespective of the height at which we have taken, the object is bound to fall. So here there is a physical phenomena and this outcome is sure and specific. And therefore, when we conduct this experiment, maybe at different locations, at different points of time and at different conditions, the object is going to fall in a particular way, and therefore it's a specific tendency that we are going to understand and identify. And similarly, in case of biology or medicine, or it could be any other science that we deal with. But all of us who are dealing with social science, I'm told that like the participants of this particular program are commerce and management students predominantly, and commerce and management students deal with science which is social science. Therefore, in a social science type of a scenario, we will not be in a position to say that like whatever outcomes that we get out of the research are going to be universally true. The results of the research here are helping us to understand or helping us to make statements of general tendency. So what do we mean by general tendency? The statements, what we arrive at after the research work is true in general, but with particular cases that could be exceptions. And the statements that we are going to arrive at are going to be true for a geographical region at a given point of time for a given population through a given sample. So whatever we arrive at after the research is over, conclusions that we arrive at, if we try to generalize it across the globe, it may not really work. But in case of pure science, the statements that we arrive at are true across the globe. And in case of social sciences, we may have to be really careful what should be the generalization. So it also leads to the situation that there are variations of research. Therefore, we call those statements that we arrive at after the research as statements of general tendencies. So if that is the case, the underlying factor for this or the reason for this situation is basically the concept called variable, and therefore the title here for this particular discussion is different types of variables and scales of measurement, so on and so forth. So let us look at the different stages that are almost like mandatory when we are conducting the research, and keeping the variable in mind. Research should have the first stage as, of course, the foundational stage of having the research objective in mind, having the hypothesis set, having identified the population and the sample, etc. When it comes to variables, we need to collect information. So that happens to be the stage one. And the collected information needs to be presented. And then once the analysis, once the data is presented in the appropriate format, we do the analysis and analysis leads us to interpretation. These are 4 common steps that we use while conducting a research. So, when we talk about data collection, one needs to be very, very careful about the objectives of the research work, the hypothesis involved, and the research design that we are going to adopt. Because if the data collection is not appropriately done, then whatever we do later may not really give us the right output. And therefore, in research, the stage of data collection becomes very, very critical. And here, since we are talking about data collection, we need to understand the variables for which we need to collect the data, right? And that is how I think logically we should understand the word variable and the importance of variable and all the other features that are associated with variable and its involvement in any research. Now, can anybody tell me what do we mean by the word variable? If there are any responses, you can put it in the chat box so that we can quickly look at how is the word variable understood. What do I really mean by a variable? Again, this you would have already discussed in your previous sessions as well. So can you tell me what do we mean by a variable, or how do we understand the word variable? Professor Ayush Kumar, if there are any responses, you can read it out. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Ravikant Jaiswal has said which can be changed easily.
Which can be changed easily. Okay. Which can be changed easily. Okay,
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
very good.
Anyone? If you want to respond, just write down it is in the chat box and to everyone so that I can view it.
Yes. It's important that you participate in the discussion so that the interaction helps you to understand
Yes,
it
ma'am.
better and
One
makes,
more.
yes.
Sorry, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
One more answer has came from the Shefali Shukla, which can be measured and changed in abstract term.
Which can be measured and changed in the abstract form. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, good.
And the next session, varying expressions.
Okay, varying expression.
Any quality or quantity that varies is called the variable.
Okay, very good. Any quantity or quality that varies is a variable. Wonderful. So there are some 3-4 different responses which have come. All of them, something which is not a constant. That's another response. I think I just now see something which
Yes,
is
ma'am.
not
Yes,
a
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
response.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
very, very witty way of answering the variable because it's like a constant, right? Opposite of variable is a constant. So something which is not a constant is a variable. It's a very logically witty way of giving a answer. That's wonderful. So we understand a variable in different formats. Okay. So let us try to look at the term variable in a very simple manner. A variable is a measurable characteristic that varies. So here, the word variable is highlighted, but the to be highlighted word is the characteristic. Okay, something which is being studied, a characteristic which is being studied is a variable if it changes its value from one unit of study to another unit of study, right? So it's very, very important to have this in mind. So here what happens when a measure which we are, a characteristic or an event which we are trying to measure, if it varies from one unit of study to another unit of study, then it is called a variable. Now, can we have some examples? Anybody? Can we have some examples? Any example that comes to your mind? I'll give you one or two examples so that you will think of other examples to help me out. Let us say the duration for conducting a session is a variable. Do you agree? Age is a variable. Yes, somebody, Rahul.
Yes.
Rahul Kumar Mishra said age is a variable. Very good. Any other variable which comes to your mind? Duration of time spent for completing the work is a variable. Marital status is a variable. Very good. Height is a variable. Weight is a variable. Experience, income. Excellent. So you can notice there are variables in many different forms around us. But as a researcher, it's important. Income is a variable. Yes. As a researcher, it will become very important for all of us to understand what type of a variable we are dealing with. Here itself, when you are looking at the examples that are shared by you, age is a variable, price is a variable, tax collected is a variable, marital status is a variable, gender is a variable, so on and so forth. So can we categorize them into different types? It should be very important for any researcher to understand the type of variables. Fuzzy number is I think it should be also a variable. Yes. So these are important concepts to understand. We can categorize. So can you tell me broadly what are the categories that we can categorize them into? Independent and dependent variable. Okay, we'll come to that a little later. The idea of independent and dependent variables will come to it a little later, because the categorization is not just that. Even before I say it's an independent variable or a dependent variable, I should know something else. So what do you think is the very basic categorization of type of variables? Okay, let us see. Basically, when we talk about variables, we broadly classify them into two categories. One is called the categorical variable and the other one is called the numerical variable. So somebody, while talking about variable, they said something which is measurable. Many a times it so happens that we have variables, but it's not measurable. For example, somebody said marital status. Marital status is a variable. Depending upon whom we are contacting, the person might be a married person or may not be a married person. So marital status could be married or unmarried. Or later on, you can further subdivide it into maybe divorcee or many other categories. Let us not get into the details of it, but the marital status per se is a variable because it has different values from one individual to another individual. But can I measure it? Is it possible to measure? Definitely no. It is not a measurable, but it can take values like marital status is yes, marital status could be no. So here I am classifying the individuals into categories and therefore it is called categorical variable. It could be yes, no type of binary response that we get, but non-measurable becomes a categorical variable. On the other hand, there are many other examples given like tax collected, height, weight, many other such examples which are given here. They are all numerical in nature because height is a number. When I measure the height, it's a number. When I measure the weight, it's a number. When I take example of tax collected, let us say in a particular month, the GST collected by state or GST collected by the center, or it's the tax collected in a particular toll, all of that are measurable. They all take some number. They become numerical. Here, when we deal with the types of variable and the understanding of the variable, I'm that all of you understand the meaning of the word unit of measurement. It's a very important concept, because if you do not understand what is a unit of measurement, then we end up collecting wrong information, or we do not understand the variable of study. Okay, just for the sake of example, suppose somebody said tax collected is a variable. Yes, in a research, if I want to see how the GST collection is changing over different months, right? If I want to understand the movement of GST over different months, then the tax collected here as in the form of GST is a variable. My unit of study will be every month. On the other hand, if I want to see the tax collected per quarter, then every quarter will become unit of study. Similarly, if I want tax collected by different states in the country per month, then every state is a unit of measurement and every month is a unit of measurement. So this clarity we should have as a researcher when we are trying to collect data. Therefore, now we are dealing with both categorical and numerical variable types when we deal with the research. And depending upon the type of research and the objectives of the research, we may be having predominantly categorical variables or predominantly numerical variables. It depends on the type of research that you are carrying out. And categorical data can be obtained through different scales that we are going to discuss a little later. And broadly, they are classified into nominal data or ordinal data. Are they the only two? Maybe no, but broadly, this is how we try to categorize. And when it comes to numerical or measurable variables, we collect the data on an interval scale or on a ratio scale. So these broad classifications, I think everybody is aware of. As we go further in the discussion, we will get into the detailed explanation of each one of them. And also, you might be very much aware of a word called qualitative variable and quantitative variable. I think most of you are aware of this, isn't it? Are we all aware of this concept called qualitative and quantitative variables? Yes. Yes, because we deal with qualitative variable when we look at gender, when we look at marital status, when we look at color of the brand which is being sold, even the brand which is being sold for a particular product type, all of that are qualitative in nature. How many units are sold becomes a quantitative variable. So this is broadly the types of variables. But do we end understanding the types of variable here? Definitely no. The next thing that one needs to look at is further classification of types of variables. I'm also giving some links here. These links are useful links which you can maybe later visit to see more into the details. The very first type that I'm looking at is observed variable and latent variable. What do we mean by observation, or what do we mean by observed variable? We have already understood the meaning of the word variable. Variable is a characteristic which moves or which changes its value from one unit of study to another unit of study. Now, what do we mean by then observed variables? As the word itself here suggests, observe means observation. Observation means something which can be seen, something which can be understood, something which can be obviously looked at. So when we look at an event, when we look at a situation, certain things are evident, certain things are very clear to us to see and understand. For example, age, height, marital status, the tax collected, whatever examples that you have all given, most of them can be seen, right? When I ask somebody about the marital status, the answer could be yes or no, married or unmarried, whatever. This is something which is very easily seen. So these variables are referred to as observed variables. So when we are designing our research, the very important idea here is to see whether the that are under study are observed variables or not. This is something which we need to be very clear of. And then comes the question of latent variables. What do you mean by latent variables? What I think again, the word latent, I think all of us understand the word latent. Or what do we understand by the word latent? Hidden. Okay, very good. Latent means hidden. Absolutely. So when we talk about latent variables, in any research, there could be variables which are not very obviously visible to the researcher. When we say visible, it is not only the eye part of it. Like we should not, we will be in a position to feel it. We should be in a position to understand it. If that is the case, then it is observed. But there are certain things which are very subtle, which will not catch our attention, which will not focus our attention upon. In such cases, we miss out on the existence of certain variables, and those variables are called latent variables because they are hidden. They cannot be obviously observed. These are the variables which might trouble us when we are conducting research, and therefore one needs to be very careful about these type of unobserved variables. But look at a very small, in small font, I have written something called manifest variable. Right here, there is something called manifest variable. This is something which will help us to understand that though there are variables which are not very obviously observed by the researcher, there is a existence of latent, or there is an existence of hidden variable. So there are certain variables which will help us to understand that in a given situation, there are some hidden variables. Those variables which will help us to see the hidden variable are called manifest variables. So they manifest the presence of latent variable. So let us quickly take an example. Products purchased. A broad understanding here. When I say product purchase, if there are 10 different brands available to purchase, and if a customer walks in to purchase a particular product and purchases a particular product, we can always say whether which brand was purchased by the customer. So it is an observation that we can easily make. Or which product gets sold very frequently, we can easily make out. Which color gets sold very frequently? Which shop is being visited to buy the product? All these are very, very obviously observable variables, and therefore they become observed variables. Now let us look at another variable, pure influence or the brand image that is carried by the customer in the mind. Where do I classify this into? Is it an observed variable or it's a latent variable? Where do I classify this into? Is it an observed variable or will it be a latent variable? It's a latent variable according to Anuj. It's an observed variable according to Gunjan. Okay, any other response? And Purnendu also says it is observed. Okay. Now think a little. Pure influence. When you go to buy a particular product, let us assume that you want to buy a mobile phone. What makes you buy a particular mobile phone? It could be the size, the quality, the quantity, etc., 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 the price and the color, so on and so forth, the availability, all of that, the brand image. But do I get to explain exactly why a particular brand appeals to me? or do I get to have a very clear expression of the feeling or the thinking that, okay, if I carry a particular phone, I will be looked up by my peer group, and therefore I need to carry this mobile phone. This is something which is there in the back of my mind. Can somebody understand why I'm exactly going to buy a particular product or particular brand? Features could be an observed variable, but when I'm talking about the pure influence, is it going to be an observed variable? It is difficult to observe. It is a variable which is hidden in our mind. There is an element of impact of this variable on our mind. In the nth minute when I want to purchase the product, I may change my decision to buy or not to buy depending upon what I think at that point of time. In spite of price being the same, in spite of product features being the same, in spite of everything being the same, I might end up buying brand X against brand Y, because at that point of time I might think brand X is going to give me a better status among my friends or among my colleagues vis-a-vis brand Y. For example, if somebody is buying, let's say, an Apple against something like a Samsung, let us say both are 1 lakh rupee worth mobiles. Somebody buys an Apple vis-a-vis somebody buys a Samsung. The Apple is supposed to be keeping you in a better status quo as compared to a Samsung mobile, and therefore they might end up buying it. So this imaginary status quo or the pure influence that we have in our mind is not observed. It is a latent variable, but it makes an important impact on the product purchase decision. Therefore, as a researcher, one needs to be really careful about all these latent variables which might affect the observed variable value. And let us look at one more example, price of the product. What do you think? Whether it's an observed variable or a latent variable? It's an observed variable. Okay. Purnendu and Anuj, sorry, yeah, Anju Singh, Diksha. So all of you are saying it's an observed variable. Yes, price is very, very clearly observed. But here, the idea of taking the price is to showcase the price also as a manifest variable. Okay. Now, usually what happens in the minds of the customer, if I'm ready to pay whatever I'm ready to pay, suppose higher the price, in my mind, I think that the better is the quality. In my mind, I think when I pay more price, quality is going to be better for the product. And if I pay low price, the quality could be low. That is what is the thinking as a customer. Then what happens? The brand image or the product's quality image will be manifested by the price of the product, at what price point it is sold. If the product is sold at a higher price point, then the customers might think that the product quality is better. And therefore, here we can look at the variable price both as an observed variable and also as a manifest variable. It manifests the thinking of the customer about the quality of the product. So these things should be kept in mind when you're looking at understanding the variables. Is there any question that you would like to ask? Any questions, or shall I go ahead? No questions? If you have any questions, you can just post your questions on the chat box so that I can answer as and when it comes. Okay, somebody talked about dependent and independent variables. Okay, before I move into that, latent variables are also called as constructs when we do structural equation modeling. Okay, most often in a structural equation modeling, we don't call them as variables, we call them as constructs. So you can have this in your mind. Can price sometimes be latent variable too? It is slightly difficult because price of a product is always something which is very evidently made known to everybody. If the price of the product is not known to the people, then it may not be possible for people to buy it, right? So it should be something which is observed, but that might influence a latent variable like brand image or peer influence. If I carry a expensive mobile, my peer team will look up to me as a, oh my God, this is somebody who is carrying an expensive mobile. And many of the times, this so-called status symbols, like expensive brands, we end up paying high prices not for the quality of the product alone, but for the status symbol that is attached with the product. For example, if you look at a Manish Malhotra clothing, maybe for one sari or one outfit, people might end up buying 10 to 15 lakhs. Not just because it is expensive, it is because Manish Malhotra. So that brand image or the pure influence, and especially if a celebrity is walking the red carpet in an Oscar award ceremony, then definitely what outfit they wear becomes a important issue for gossip as well as discussion. So people would like to have these things in mind. So while deciding the designer, while deciding the outfit that they wear, there is something which is working in the mind, which is latent, which is not very evident to everybody. But we still try to understand what makes them buy whatever they have bought. Okay, does it answer your question? So price most likely is an observed variable, but it can be a manifesting variable as well. Now coming to dependent and independent variable, somebody had already mentioned about it earlier. Dependent variable and independent variables are very important variables that we deal with in a research. If there is a cause and effect relationship, and if our attempt is to understand what is the effect of a particular variable on another variable, then the study revolves around understanding this cause and effect. So in such situations, it's very, very important to have a clear understanding of dependent and independent variable. In simple words, independent variables are those variables which can be under the control of the researcher. Dependent variable is that variable, or dependent variables are those variables which are not under the control of the researcher but gets influenced by the changes that happen in the independent variable. For every change in the independent variable, the dependent variable also changes. So this relationship we are able to find out, then it is dependent and independent variable situation. For example, as I told you, the product price influences the demand of the product. So here, price could be an independent variable which can be controlled by the researcher or the seller. Demand is something which cannot be controlled by the product seller or the producer or the management. Demand is driven by the market, and therefore it is outside of the control of the manager or the seller. So demand becomes a dependent variable and price becomes an independent variable, right? So this is a very simple concept to understand, but as we move further, I think we'll understand it furthermore. And sometimes dependent variable are synonymously used as endogenous, and independent variables are also referred to as exogenous. But there will be a small variation in the type of definition you might get to see in different literature. But for the time being, you can say Exogenous is synonym to independent, endogenous is synonym to dependent variable. So these are the first two types. Let us look at the third type. Extraneous and confounding. Extraneous variable and confounding variable. This is again a very important idea that we need to look at when we are doing social science research. Many a times we think that we are talking about all the variables as a whole in the research, but our results might still not be as expected by us, or one should not go with a real expectation as although. Now assume that price of the product and the demand of the product is being studied. Will it get affected by any other variable which we think does not exist? Or, in other words, can there be any other variable outside of the scope of the study which will still influence the price of the product and the demand for the product? Can you think of any such situations? Any idea or any thought, any situation that comes to your mind? Keeping the same two variables in mind, price and demand. Yes, it can change. So yes, change in taste and preference. Okay. There can be income. Okay. Income could be another variable which might influence. Okay. Okay. Any other thing? Brand image. Okay. Age. Change due to monsoon, season, etc. Very nice. Durgesh is saying that brand image. Okay. All other factors except price. Okay. I think Anju Singh is very logical minded. Okay. So always like complimenting factors I'm getting to hear from Anju. Right. So now here usually what happens when we try to understand price and demand, we go back to the definitions of economics and say demand is a function of price, availability, tastes and preferences, computators, substitute products, etc., etc., etc. Right? So when we talk about demand, obviously we take into consideration all these variables. But definitely somebody has mentioned, Durgesh has mentioned changing seasons. Sometimes we fail to take season into consideration, which is an extraneous situation, not under the control of the researcher or the manipulator, but it definitely influences the demand. Not just the price, not just the taste and preferences, not just the substitute, but the season in which it is being sold or it is being demanded can also have an influence. Now here, the difference between extraneous and confounding variable is that both are external to the study limit, basically, but the difference could be in case of extraneous variables, there may not be a cause and effect relationship between the variables that we are trying to study, but because of the variable which is extraneous in nature, we might get to see a cause and effect relationship. Meaning, if I eliminate this extraneous variable, then there may not be any cause and effect relationship. But in the presence of that extraneous variable, the cause and effect relationship could be observed. And now again, when we talk about extraneous variable, in a particular study, if a variable becomes an extraneous variable, it does not mean that it remains extraneous in every study, right? It may not be extraneous in every study. It could also be a dependent or an independent variable for some other study. In case of confounding variables, the most important difference between pure extraneous and extraneous confounding is confounding variable influences both independent and dependent variable. Okay, how it influences, we will try to look at through an example. Now, on the left hand side here on the screen, you can see some examples of X, Y, Z. Now, can you tell me among X, Y, Z, which one could be dependent variable, independent variable, extraneous variable, or a confounding variable? If you have understood the meaning of extraneous and confounding. And similarly, you can see here another 3 variables. So among the 6 examples that are given here, can you tell me which are the independent variable, which could be an independent variable? Among the 6 variables. Exam performance is dependent variable. Okay, good. Shifali Shukla is saying that. Okay. Correct. Dependent variable. Examination performance is a dependent variable. Okay. Exam performance is okay. Recovery is dependent. Okay. Okay. Recovery from illness is dependent variable. Okay. Very good. What X is, okay, X is independent variable. Learning mode, X means here learning mode could be independent, Y is dependent, performance is independent, body type is independent, learning mode is also dependent because it will depend on some other factors like environment, concentration, etc. Learning mode is independent, medicine is independent. Sorry, ma'am, performance is dependent. Okay, dependent body type is dependent variable. Body type is dependent variable. Okay, okay. Some of the responses have got to discuss. Okay, learning mode. Somebody said it depends on many other factors like concentration, etc. Yes, it depends. But can we choose in spite of our concentration, interest for the subject, so on and so forth. Body type is dependent. Okay, body type is dependent. Okay, body type depends on what? Okay, let me quickly discuss on that. Learning mode, the mode of learning, whether I want to learn through experimentation, I want to learn through books, or I want to learn through online platforms, or I want to have a combination of these different modes, or I want to listen to somebody and then learn through that, storytelling mode. All of that are choices made by the learner. Based on the choices that you make for the mode, for the learning process, the level of understanding could be different. And the level of understanding, usually we try to assess whether the student has understood or not through examination. So here, performance on the examination may not be very much dependent on the learning mode. The performance of the student might sometimes could be even independent of the learning mode. But there is some type of a possible relationship that we can bring in through a concept called prior knowledge and the language skills. The meaning of language skills here is, suppose I try to look into books or try to look into online mode, and the language that is used in the textbooks or in the online platforms could be such that I'm not comfortable learning the subject matter through that language. In that case, not because I have used a particular learning mode I'm performing badly, but because of my prior knowledge or because of my language skills, I'm not able to perform well in the examination. On the other hand, if my prior knowledge and language skills are better, then again, not because I've used a particular learning mode, in spite of using whichever learning mode I'm using, my performance in the examination could be better. So When we deal with these type of examples, many a times we simply blindly end up with a correlation analysis. We think that learning mode and regression, examination performance can be modeled through regression and then try to assess it, which may not be the case. There could be another hidden variable like a prior knowledge or a language skills of the individual, which might make it appear that the learning mode is influencing the examination performance. In reality, learning mode may not be influencing performance, but still we end up arriving at a conclusion that, okay, different learning modes are leading to different examination performance levels. So here, prior knowledge or language skills is an extraneous variable. Okay. On the other hand, when we look at the second example, medicine and diet, recovery from illness and body type, medicine and diet is usually prescribed by the dietitian and the doctor. When they prescribe diet and medicine, it is under the control of the person who is prescribing it. So it is independent. That way it is independent. Recovery from illness depends on, definitely it should depend on medicine and the type of diet that we take. Otherwise, none of us need to take any medicine or any diet when we are sick, right? If the medicines and diet are not helping us in recovery, then there is no need for taking medicine, no need to follow a particular diet. So, recovery from an illness should depend ideally on medicine. But the type of the body that we possess, whether it is a body which has a lot of heat in it or a lot of sensitive to cold or sensitive to any other extraneous conditions, sometimes may take more time to recover, sometimes may take less time to recover. Or the level of recovery also could be extremely good or extremely low. Similarly, somebody has written exercise. Exercise we can decide whether to do or not. It's our choice. What type of an exercise we do again is our choice as an individual. But will that help me in achieving what I want to achieve? Maybe recover from the illness or lose weight or get fitness or get 6 abs, whatever. Is it going to help me in that? So what I get out of the process that I'm following, whatever is the result is the dependent variable. Whatever we do is the independent variable. But in between, some people might recover in 14 days, some people might recover in 20 days. That could be because of the type of the body that they possess. Now here, body type influences both the medicine and the diet required and the time required or the type of recovery that somebody gets into after a period of time of consuming medicine and diet. Somebody who is very sensitive to certain medicines cannot be given a particular medicine because body type is so. So here notice body type is not just influencing the independent variable, it also influences the dependent variable. Such variables are called confounding variables. It is external to these two variables, but they influence both independent and dependent variable. So here again, when we choose the variable and when we do the analysis, one needs to be very careful in understanding the type of variable that we are dealing with. And then comes moderator and mediating variable. This right now I'll not touch. Maybe in the next slide I'll help you understand what exactly is a moderator and a mediator variable. Sometimes it's also referred to as moderating and mediating variable. Okay, we'll look at that in the next slide. And finally, we can also look at control variables. Now, in any of these situations that we explained as examples, it's important that at least the extraneous variables are managed well. Okay, if the variables which are not really of interest to us as a researcher starts influencing the variables which are of interest to us, then it becomes a problem. in the research. Therefore, we need to manage those variables so that our analysis, our result are in line with our objectives and also helps us in getting the appropriate decision later. So there we talk about what are known as control variables. Now, what are control variables? For example, let us say I'm talking about the example of medicine and recovery from illness. If I'm talking about medicine and recovery from illness, maybe the body type I can control, in the sense I take a group of people while conducting the experiment. I'll take a group of people who have similar body conditions and give them the same medicine and the same diet and observe their recovery stages. In such a situation, the variables which we are trying to induce into the system are only two variables, like medicine and diet is one variable and recovery from the illness is another variable. And all other variables which might influence this process and the experiment are kept constant, are kept standard. So we standardize the experimentation situation and try to understand how one variable influences the other variable. So these variables which are made to be in standard form or constant are called control variables. So to achieve this or to ensure that the impact of extraneous or confounding variables are kept to the minimum, we try to manage the variables by standardizing the process and following the principles of experimentation. You might have learned something about designs of experiments. I'm not very sure whether you are aware of those concepts or not. Designs of experiments in any research gives us a very well-defined process of experimentation, and it helps us in standardizing the experimentation procedure and follow all the principles of experimentation. You might ask me, should we always conduct an experiment in a research? Answer is, I'm not talking about the lab experiments as such. Even a survey can be structured in a very standardized and systematic way. Even that is an experiment in a general sense. So by standardizing the procedure and following all the principles of experimentation, one will be able to keep the impact of extraneous and confounding variables to the minimum. And the other thing which is very, very, very important is going with random sample and random allocation of values for independent variables. So this process of randomization, there are some principles called randomization, localization, and repetition, and so on and so forth. These principles in research will help us to keep the impact of unwanted, unwarranted variables to the low. But here the idea is to understand that these type of variables do exist in a research context. Okay. Okay. Any question before I go to the next slide? Before I start explaining this, is there any question? Any question? No. Okay. Fine. What is meant by the local control? Okay. See here what happens when we try to conduct an experiment. As I told you, if we are conducting an experiment, let us assume a management related example. Assume that we want to understand the impact of advertisements on consumer purchase behavior. I want to only keep these two variables under study and try to eliminate the impact of all other variables between these two variables. I want to study if the advertisements are going to influence the purchase decision of the consumer. Now here, as we already understood, the purchase decision might depend on the brand image, the peer pressure, or the color combination, the availability, so on and so forth. But if I want to study the impact of advertisement on the consumer purchase decision, if all these variables also start influencing the purchase decision, then I will not be in a position to see whether advertisements are really making an impact or not. So in such a situation, what we need to do is, or what we try to do is, keep all the other variables at a constant. For example, conduct the experiment in such a situation that the customers are all exposed to the same advertisement with all the other conditions being kept constant. The price being constant, the substitutes being constant, the peer pressure not getting into their mind much. So you take care of all of that before conducting the experiment, and then expose them to a particular advertisement, maybe for some number of times. And within the group, you can say group A is exposed to advertisement for 10 times, the group B is exposed to advertisement for 20 times. Group A is exposed to type A advertisement, group B is exposed to type B advertisement, so on and so forth. Again, the modifications you can do. But all other variables are kept constant, and then see whether the customers will go and buy the product or not. Then it is most likely that the customers are buying or not buying the product because of the advertisement that they get exposed to. So here, when we try to control all the other possible influencers, we are calling it as local control. Does that answer your question? Okay. So now let us look at quickly moderator and mediating. Confounding variable I've already explained. So let us take an example for moderating and mediating variable. Here you can notice on the diagrammatic representation, when we talk about an independent variable and a dependent variable, a variable which is external to these two, but influences the relationship between the two. The moderator is a variable which influences the relationship between the two. Such a variable is called as a moderator variable or a moderating variable. So let us take an example and look at it. Assume that working hours is an independent variable, because I can choose how many hours to work. When I say I can choose as an employee, maybe I will not be able to choose in all possible situations, but assume that you have flexible working hours, and also the organization gives you a freedom to choose the working hours. That is one possibility. And second, organization mandates a particular number of working hours. In some cases, it could be 8 hours a day. In some cases, it could be 10 hours a day. In some cases, it could be 12 hours a day. So let us take up all such examples and try to understand the working hours. Then, what is the stress level? Do you think stress level gets influenced by working hours? Do you think that our stress levels get influenced by working hours? Yes or no? Yes and might be. It can't be yes and might be. It should be might be or yes. Either of the two. Most often, stress levels gets impacted by working hours. And one of the papers which I exclusively studied very clearly showed that working hours and the working conditions influence stress level of the employees. And there can be many literature that you will get to see in the management literature about the stress levels. And psychology studies also, you will get to see a lot of literature showing that working hours will influence stress level. Now, what could be the moderator variable here? The gender. The moderator variable could be the gender. Why gender could be a moderator variable? Now, being a woman, working hours might have a particular level of stress level on a woman. For the same level of working hours, there could be a different impact on stress level for a male. Meaning, if I standardize the working hours and try to understand standardize the working hours and also standardize all other extraneous variables and try to understand the stress level of men vis-a-vis stress level of women, then women have shown different level of stress as compared to men. Here, therefore, the stress level gets impacted because of the gender of the individual. Though there is a relationship, gender also moderates the stress level. It might reduce the stress level because somebody is a male, or it might increase the stress level because somebody is a male, right? So gender becomes a moderating variable here. Mediator is a slightly different one. You can notice the independent variable affects the mediator, and the mediator in turn affects the dependent variable. Let us take up an example like this. Assume that we are looking at diverse workforce in an organization. When I say diverse workforce, I mean to say people of different country, people from different ethnicity, people from different socio-economic conditions, people of different gender, people of different educational background, so on and so forth. Now, when an organization has varied workforce or diversity in the workforce, the selection of the varied diverse workforce is a choice of the organization. So this is an independent variable. Now, the organization would like to study if the organization effectiveness is influenced by the organization's workforce diversity. This is a very typical HR research that we get to see in literature. So organizational effectiveness gets influenced by work diversity. Now we are talking about a dependent variable and an independent variable. Because workforce diversity is a choice of the organization, it's independent. Organizational effectiveness depends on the type of diversity they have. So very clearly it is dependent and independent variable. Now, what might happen when the diversity is ingrained into the workforce? People, because of their diverse background, will have different levels of exposure, different levels of experiences, and different levels of creativity. So what does it shows? Independent variable influences level of exposure, experience, and creativity. And because of this exposure, experience, and creativity, it also influences the organizational effectiveness. So workforce diversity influences organizational effectiveness even through experience, exposure, and creativity of the workforce, which is because of the diversity that is inbuilt into the system. And therefore, what type of variable are we dealing with in terms of exposure, experience, and creativity? What is the type of variable that we are dealing with? Is it a moderator or a mediator? Mediator? Any other answer? Mediator? Mediator? Okay. Okay. So most of you have said mediator, which is the right identification. So exposure or experience or creativity here is a mediating variable. Now let us look at another example. Organization culture or organization policy or organization expectation. As a HR policy, if the organization wants to have diversity, they can have it. But if the organization decides not to have diversity, then they may not have the diversity. So here what happens? Organization diversity also influences the exposure, the experience, or the creativity. Or in other words, organization policy or organization expectation will have an impact or will influence the workforce diversity and the organization efficiency only if the organization decides to have. If the organization policy is to have openness towards diversity, then exposure, experience, and creativity enhances, therefore organization efficiency improves. But if the organization has a closed policy, then the opposite will happen. Therefore, organization policy or expectation is also a variable. But what type of variable is this? It's a moderator variable because it moderates the relationship between workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness. So when we talk about variables, these are the things that we need to keep in mind about the varied type of variables that we deal with. Any questions before I move to this? Yeah, Shifali said moderator. Asta also said moderator, correct? Any other, any comment, question before I move to the next one? No? No questions? Okay. Now that we have understood different types of variables and also the very basic idea of what is a variable. Variable is something which changes from one unit of study to another. So when it changes from one unit of study to another, we need to have an understanding of what was the value at first unit of measurement and what is the value at the second unit of measurement. So when we understand this values, we call it as data. So let us try to understand what is data. What is data? Do you get to see some data here? Do we have some data here? Can you tell me what are the different data points that you get to see here? Where do we have the data here? These are all some pictures. But do we deal with data in this slide? Color, number, quality or quantity? Okay, somebody said there is no variable, not able to see the full screen. Quantity. Quantity is not data, right? I want to see exactly what is the data that there are just information, okay? It is just information. Can you tell me what is the information that you're getting to have from this slide? 3 glasses of milk, okay? Is it data? 3 glasses of milk? It is some white liquid or it could be even some white powder, but whatever it is, let us assume that it is milk. Sets of pencil, okay? Different colors of pencils, very good. Volume could be 200 ml. Number of pencils, okay, color pencils with different colors, okay. Nobody is commenting about the apple with the butterfly on it. Okay, so if you notice here, quickly to tell you, there are lots of data available on this. Okay, quickly to say, look at the example. As somebody said, 3 glasses of milk. Let us say, assume that it's milk in the glass, so 3 glasses of milk. And when you look at each of the glass, you can have lot of parameters to study on the glass itself. What is the type of glass that you are dealing with? What is the material used? How much is the thickness? How much is the length? How much is the width? How much is the opaqueness or the transparency of each of the glass that you get to see? What is the quantity of milk in each glass? So on and so forth. You can answer each one of these questions. And many more. What is the color of the milk that you get to see? Is it white, pale white, pure white, bluish white, so on and so forth? That's also a variable and the data. And when you look at the pencils, again, number of pencils could be one, color of the pencils could be another, length of the pencils could be another, diameter of the pencil could be another, the grip of the pencil could be another, so on and so forth. So you can see a lot of data there as well. And when you look at the apple and the small artistic work that is done, again the color of the apple, size of the apple, weight of the apple, the parameters with respect to the features of the butterfly, so on and so forth. But if you just look at the apple and the butterfly, you might also say it's a piece of art, and therefore it's a nice work, creative work, not so good work, not so creative work, so on and so forth. So here, when I look at 3 glasses of milk, I'm counting the glasses of milk. On the other hand, if I want to look at the transparency of each of the glass, can I count the transparency of the glass? Can I count it? Can I count and say, okay, this is the transparency of the glass? I can't. Its answer is no. I may have to measure the transparency of the glass through some gadget, using some gadget. Quantity of milk in each of the glass, again, I can measure it using some tool or some gadget. Length of the pencil, I can use a scale or a meter tape or something and see how many centimeters or how many meters, etc. Color, I cannot measure. Color of the pencil, I cannot measure. I can only observe and see and say that it is black color, blue color, purple, etc. So here, you can also look at this information into broad 2 categories that we talked about in the classification of variables, types of variables, whether it is measurable or non-measurable. Color is non-measurable, whereas many other things are measurable. So, qualitative and quantitative. So, when we talk about qualitative variables like color of the milk, color of the pencil, these are not measured, but they are felt, they are observed. They are called qualitative variables, and it is also referred to as attributes. Okay, qualitative variables are also referred to as attributes. But on the other hand, if there are quantitative variables like number of glasses, number of pencils, length of the pencil, so on and so forth, we either count it or we measure it. Okay, when we count it, we have some type of numbers. When we measure it, we have some other type of numbers. So, when we count, we are dealing with what we call as discrete variables. Okay, the type of variable I have not included in the slide, but you can always make a note of it. When we count, we are dealing with discrete variables. On the other hand, when we measure using a tool or a scale, we are dealing with continuous variable. So, in the other way to put it across, when we are dealing with discrete variables, we count, and when we are dealing with continuous variables, we measure. Milk, quantity of milk is continuous variable, so we measure. Number of pencils is discrete variable, so we count. Understood? And then, what do we really use, or how do we really count, or how do we really measure? Needs a tool, and the tool to quantify the variable is called a scale of measurement. A scale of measurement is a tool that we use to measure a variable which is quantitative in nature. And similarly, sometimes we also try to measure qualitative variables. That could be exceptions. So we will try to understand that later. So when we use a scale of measurement, a tool to measure a quantitative variable, sometimes we have open-ended tools and sometimes we use closed-ended tools. I'm very sure all of you have got exposed to a concept called a questionnaire. And in a questionnaire, you might have been told that a good questionnaire will have closed-ended questions and minimum number of open-ended questionnaire. That's a prerequisite for a good questionnaire. What is open-ended and what is closed-ended, we'll get to see a little later. So, this is how we basically understand what is measurement scale. Now, tell me, what do you get to see here? It's a number plate of a vehicle. Number plate of a vehicle, I can read. Okay, this is one example. Let us look at the other example. Let us look at the other picture where we are getting to see the finalists and the result of a beauty pageant. Okay, somebody gets award, gets recognized as the beauty queen, the winner, the first runner, the second runner, and maybe the other two quarter finalists. Another example of a thermometer measuring the temperature. Another example of a calendar, let's say of some 2 years, 2015-16. Let us look at another example or a picture of some students and some girls and boys sitting and making a group discussion. And another example picture of a weighing machine weighing some vegetables. Now, do you see the difference in the type of answers that I'm going to ask you to answer? Okay, let me ask you the first question. In the case of the picture of a car, what is the meaning of the number plate? Or which brand of car are we getting to see? These are the two questions. What is the meaning of the number plate? And what is the brand that we are getting to see? Number plate is equal to a name or an identifier, okay? And the brand is Ford. Very good. Any other answer? Assigning number, okay? Brand is Ford. It is a registration number of the vehicle. Okay. Very good. So when we get to see something like this, can I add all those number and say something meaningful out of that? Or can I say that this has a better value as compared to some other number which is registered on some other vehicle of, let us say, Ford itself? Can I compare and say MH12DE1433 is better than some other number? Addition not possible, comparison is also not possible, right? Usually for this type of a, this one I cannot say, I can compare, but it actually does not make any sense even if I make comparison. The only thing is like it helps you to understand certain details, like as some of you are mentioning, it only helps me to understand that it is from so and so place, maybe so and so RTO and so series. And Ford is a brand. This is a Ford car, maybe some other brand could be, let us say Tata, or some other could be Maruti Suzuki, or some other could be a Chevrolet, anything like that. So this we call it as a nominal scale data. Brands can be compared. Brand per se cannot be compared, but we say, okay, brand X is better than brand B in the market, or brand X has a better preference over brand B in the market, so on and so forth. We do compare, but they are not that very meaningful comparisons. Let us look at the pageant picture. Somebody is adjudged as the winner, first runner, second runner, and the next two maybe are quarter finalists or semi-finalists. Now, when we say person A, one person is a winner and the other person is a first runner, is there a comparison between the person 1 and person 2? There is something called a rank order. Yes. And there is a comparison. Somebody said no, but there is a comparison. And therefore, the comparison is referred to as ordinal scale. When we compare and when we know that maybe 1 is better than 2, 2 is better than 3, 3 is better than 4, when we put this scale of betterment, not so better and so on, then this is called an ordinal scale. But usually again, first winner is a category, second winner is a category, quarter finalist is a category, semi-finalist is a category. And many a times it so happens, the winner and the first runner may have a gap in the evaluation score, which let us say equal to 10 points. But the first winner and the first runner and the second runner up might have a gap of 30, 40 points. So the difference between the first and the second compared to second and the third may not be seen, and therefore it is ordinal scale. Let us look at the third set of pictures, a thermometer and a calendar. Here, these are referred to as interval scale data points, because the difference between the first and the second point and second and the third point will remain the same. Okay, for example, let us say between 0 degrees centigrade to 10 degrees centigrade, whatever is the temperature remains the same, difference remains the same between 20 and 30 or 30 and 40. But you can notice when we look at the centigrade scale and compare it with the Fahrenheit, the measurements differ, the points differ, the numbers differ. But within the Fahrenheit scale or within the centigrade scale, the difference between two successive points remain the same. Similarly, in the case of calendar, the duration between day 1 and day 2 compared to day 2 and day 3 remains the same. It is 24 hours. But when we look at, if I try to have a different analysis in terms of addition or deletion, it makes no sense or no meaning. And also in both these examples, another very important thing that you need to keep in mind is, if I say temperature is 0, does it mean that there is no temperature today? Does it mean that there is no temperature today? If I record the temperature as 0, it does not mean that the temperature is not there. A particular level of temperature, we are referring to it as 0. And if the temperature goes below that point, we call it as negative temperature. And if the temperature goes beyond or above that particular point, we call it as positive temperature. But 0 does not mean that the temperature is not there. It is called 0 degree centigrade or 0 degree Fahrenheit. Now let us look at the other two pictures. Number of students sitting and doing some group discussion. In this case, if I say the number of students in the group discussion is 0, what does it mean? Or if I say number of students attending the class is 0, what does it mean? It means that nobody turned out. It means absence of something. Not like the one which we had in the previous example. 0 means absence of something. And here you can notice we are able to count the number of participants in the group discussion, whereas in the weighing machine, we are trying to weigh the vegetable weight. We are measuring the weight of the vegetables. And here again, if I say the weight of the product is 0, it means that the product does not exist. Simply it does not exist. So Here, in case of these two examples, there is a meaning to zero, and the meaning to zero is absence. And therefore, such a scale is called a ratio scale. So broadly, we have to understand these four types of scales when we conduct research, because this influences your tool of analysis. Whatever tool you use for analysis depends on what scale of measurement are you taking in your research. Okay, I think for the right now I'll stop here. If there are any questions, you can ask. Any questions? Professor Ayush, if you
Yes,
want
ma'am.
to have.
No, ma'am, there is no any question in the chat box. So,
Okay.
session.
Mhm.
So the web will on stop, and at 2, 5 or 50, in between that, we will again join this platform. Will
Okay,
be
there's
nice,
one
ma'am.
question which I'll join at 3 o'clock. Can you please speak for a minute about criteria and predictor variable? Okay, we'll speak about
Okay.
it when we resume the session. Okay,
Okay, that's fine, ma'am.
sure, sure.
Thank you so much,
So
ma'am, for
for
this
this
session.
session, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
for the
ma'am.
session.
We
Yeah,
will again meet.
we'll resume at 3.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure.
All the research join the WebEx platform just before 10 minutes of 3 o'clock, that is 2:50, so that the sessions can be conducted in a very easy manner without any hassle. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I'll just keep this on and